Hi and welcome to our program. Today we are checking out Museum Jorn here in Silkeborg and its current exhibitions. So let's go for a guided tour. And this was also when he was
these also works together with Pierre Wimar. Early works just from after the Second World War, where he starts experimenting with the tapestries and the techniques of the tapestries with Pierre Wimar when they take up their friendship after the Second World War. But again, also as part of this interest in traditional craftsmanship, where they had a function, right? Where things had a function, and also a way of experimenting with how to include art in real everyday life. Again, you know, to take it out of the art museums, out of the galleries, and kind of give it back to the people. And this is also a way of doing that. And also this one, of course, obviously is a way of giving the art back to the people. And then today many people will say that it's a symbol of something that's more like a production for the elite, you know, or for people who are educated or something. You need to be able to read the right things out of it, but that is actually not the case for Jorn. So that's where much modern art is misunderstood. It's actually not meant to have a meaning. We don't have to be able to deduct this or that from it. It's actually just giving us space to be there, to have our own imagination and to project our own history and where we are as a human being right now into it. And that's a common misunderstanding that's really evolving around most modern art today.
Yeah, there's not a lot of people that are into it. They're kind of, I don't know, I think most people feel a bit intimidated by this because they feel like they should be able to see things, and they don't. Exactly,
but that's also what we learn in school, right? We learn that we need to be able to deduct answers from what we are dealing with all of the time. So many people, when they're at the museum, they actually go and read the sign before they see the work. They want to know the name, they want to know the title, they want to know the year it's painted. Before they actually see the actual artwork. And that's why we're putting the signs down here, because many museums put it right here next to the artwork. But we try to put it here because then the artwork actually is lifted up, and that's the most important part.
Yeah.
And then secondary, who painted it, what time, the title, etc.
Yeah, sometimes it's so confusing that you're like, what? You need to check the title to kind of have a clue even.
Yeah, and that's where the title works, but here we would like the artwork to be the first thing you see and the first thing you engage with, and then later on you can start studying the
rational
details,
thing.
And positioning it in some kind of history or some kind of historic framework. So here we have some of the actual quite rare pieces of our collection. I'd like to show you a few pieces over here by the Italian artist Lucio Fontana, who is also a world-famed name today. He is famous for his large artwork with a paper, with just one cut in it.
Okay. Ah, yes. Okay, I know.
Yeah. It's paper, but it's also in canvas, where it's just like one cut in the canvas, and that's also what he's working with here, but only with clay. So after Jorn took an interest in clay and in working with clay, he also starts traveling a bit. So he just had this lung disease, so he goes first to Switzerland to recover in the Alps to get the fresh mountain air, and then he meets some artists, and they invite him to the Italian Mediterranean town. It's a coastal town in northern Italy called Albisola. And at that point, Albisola is a place where it's really sort of a mecca for ceramists who works with modern expressions and experiments. And there Jorn meets Lucio Fontana, and he borrows his studio, and he works in his studio, and they become very close. So that's why we have actually quite a few pieces of Lucio Fontana in our collection, because of their relation Later on, Jorn would buy, a few years after, Jorn would buy his own house in Albisola that still exists and where there is a Jorn museum as well, but
It's
just
everywhere.
focusing on Albisola. Yeah. And that actually starts a completely new time. So he starts also to experiment with larger clay pieces, where he's also working with the more sort of large, square, canvas-like pieces.
Yeah. This,
and- yeah,
this reminds me a bit of the paintings that he did when he was in the hospital.
exactly. So the three-dimensional possibility of the clay that he's celebrating a lot in the beginning of the 50s. At this point, he's really also seeing what can it do if you're kind of spreading it out over a surface. So you'll still get the three-dimensional effect of it, but where he's early on trying to kind of put the painting into the three-dimensional shape. Here he's working a lot with the texture and with the depth and with the pieces. You know, he's working with what the material can actually do, and then he's also experimenting for the large piece, which he did to Aarhus, the gymnasium in Aarhus, Aarhus State Gymnasium. It's called, the big clay piece there.
Okay.
Which is truly a huge piece. And then he also he's part of starting up another movement, which is maybe after Cobra, the second largest movement he's part of, and that's the Situationist International. And they're really conceptual. It's a group of artists, also international artists, who are experimenting with situations and focusing on so the meeting between people and of how you can create situations in different ways. And they're making maps where they're, as you can see here, they're taking Paris apart and then they're putting it together in other ways. They call it psychogeography.
Yeah, what I was going to ask, what does that mean?
So that's the idea of, you know, you can kind of change the way you see the world by just, you know, and it's very playful. So they're doing a lot of interesting projects. They also do the Situationist International, a journal, where they also publish their thoughts. Okay. And they're very theoretical. Although what they do actually is quite playful, even silly sometimes. They're quite theoretical.
So everybody contributed to this?
Yeah. The artist that was part of the movement contributed. Yeah. And then one of the experiments was this one is Pino Galizio, an Italian painter, who started doing. So at this point, you could go to the butcher and then you could buy 1 meter of sausage, right? Or you could go and get, 1.5 meter of shoelace, or whatever, you know, in a shoe shop. So they also wanted to see what if you can go and get 1.5 meters of painting, of art for your wall. So they did these long lines of paper, and then they had these cannons with paint and they were splashing paint on it, so that they could mass produce an artwork. And then they would just finish it off, with a few touches to kind of give it, and then to give it that last kind of quality. And then you could go to this, this art dealer, art shop, the artist, and then you could buy, like 3 meters of painting. And we have a few of these lines of painting. They're actually quite amazing. Yeah,
there are some shapes that seem so clear, even though it's clearly like a splash.
Yeah, it's the splash, right? So.
Yeah. And you can really see different things.
Yeah.
Like this part is completely different from that one.
Yeah, and probably because 2 different artists were kind of making the last final touches on it, right?
Yeah, it's funny because it's very clear, the difference. Yeah.
So quite an interesting experiment. And one of Jorn's new friends in Italy, one of the guys who actually recommends him to go there, to Albisola, is Enrico Bai, who's also experimenting also with clay, but also with with works that's kind of where he's combining a lot of different materials. So here you have like a tapestry or a curtain or whatever as a background, and then you have this huge weird character coming out of it. And that's very much what Bai does. He's also experimenting with modifications, which will be the next chapter we will dive into in a second.
It really seems like wood.
Yeah. Yeah, like paper confused. With coffee stains or something, right?
Yeah.
But it's very, in a way, it's very cute, and this is a very accommodating figure that's kind of coming out to give a hug.
But it's a bit scary also, it seems like it's gonna grab you.
Yeah, it could be. Yeah, and also because it's put into this rather safe, homely setting, right? Because this idea
makes sense.
Exactly, and that idea of adding something that's ready-made, something that's already produced, and that comes from reality, and that you can meet somewhere else than in an artwork, is actually really adding it quite an interesting character, a quality. It can be, as you say, it can be a little scary, it can be uncanny, even. But I think I think it's quite a cute creature.
It is.
But yeah, definitely there's this large, vast space right here in the middle. It's a bit like it's going to swallow one up, right? There's a lot of space in it, but also a lot of humor.
Yeah, it's very light.
Yeah. This one is quite an interesting piece, actually. It's called "You Were Like This," and Jorn makes it in Paris after his mother visits. Okay. And it's supposed to be like one of her first trips outside of Denmark. She's an old lady at this point, and Jorn is there with his family, and is of course having a lot going on. And she travels to see him. And at this point, he already started becoming a bit recognized. He's actually not living in poverty anymore. He's earning a bit, at least. So she's coming to visit him in Paris, and he wants to show her around. But then it happens that then this situation occur where she's having a stomach flu or something. So actually, it happens right after she arrives in Paris. So she's just lying in bed for the time she's going to be there, and Jorn is sitting next to her because being a good son, and then they're having conversations as one has to, you have to talk if you're just like sitting there. There's nothing to do, no Netflix, no television, no nothing. So you're just sitting with your mom and next to her, and all of a sudden she starts opening up about his childhood and about the family, and when she leaves Paris and goes back to Denmark, he's really full of this, these emotions from all this knowledge that he all of a sudden got, and then he makes this painting of his family. And Jorn didn't talk much about or write much about what he actually painted. And when journalists or critics or colleagues tried to ask him, so what is this over here and what is this, Jorn tried to avoid these questions, simply by finding a clever way out of it. But in this one, he actually wrote about it afterwards, and about the situation with his mother coming down. And then this is the family. It's a family portrait, really. We have the mother over here with the red lips and, these weirdly sensitive, tender eyes. And then we have the father over here with the ultramarine blue paint strokes around him. It's a very, very powerful pigment, the ultramarine, and it's used also in religious art because it was a very expensive pigment made out of the semi-precious stone, lapis lazuli. So if you know just a bit about art history, ultramarine is one of these pigments that really signifies something important. And it does here as well, so he's this very powerful figure and very much of a patriarch. The father here is taking up a lot of space, and then we have all the children here around.
Yeah, you can see it.
You can see the figures, right?
Yeah, you can see it.
Even though this is a face over here, right? But somehow it is a face. And although this is actually also, it could also be a stone or whatever. But actually it is a face, and it's showing a lot of expression, although it's abstract like this.
Yeah. What about those colors up there? Because it kind of reminds me of the Portugal flag.
Oh yeah.
Portuguese flag.
Oh yeah, that's actually true. Are you from Portugal?
Yes.
Yeah.
That's why.
Yeah, I don't know why he's using those colors. They're working well with ultramarine for sure.
Yeah, just out of curiosity.
But yeah, I don't know if it has anything to do with Portugal. I don't think so, though. But sadly, yeah. But I think that's one of the works where you're really getting close. When if I'm giving lectures about Jorn, this is usually where I start. So instead of showing his early works to begin with, or pictures of his family, this is where I start, because this is actually the family portrait. This is the family. This is the background. This is how it was. This is how she was.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's a very important piece. It also was for Jorn. So, of course, many of the works we have on the walls here are works that Jorn collected for the museum, or he saved for the museum. So it's always like that when an artist is working. Some works are sold, but some works are also saved. And I'd like to think that he saved some of the most important pieces for the museum, because this is actually what he knew would be what would tell the story about him, and about this time he was part of, and about the movements he was part of. It was not so much about himself. It was more an experiment that would show the best that contemporary art could offer at this point to the white public in a place like Silkeborg, a place without culture. And this is another chapter. Now Jorn had his breakthrough. He's earning money, and then he also starts to experiment more. And this is one of the experiments, and this is his modifications. And they are kind of it's kind of a parallel production, but they're also very central in his works, because this is from 59, and he did modifications from 59 to 61, 62-ish. And the modifications are very interesting, because back when he did it, the art world didn't know what to do with it. They really didn't know what to do with it. Yeah, this is
very... I don't even know the word.
It's weird.
Yeah.
But then, of course, also, and they were like, why are you doing this? Because what he did was he bought old paintings from flea markets in Paris. So old paintings that somehow they were already off the walls, or already thrown away until somebody could find them and maybe use the canvas or whatever. And he didn't, he didn't just overpaint them. He actually left some of the original stuff behind, and then he just added something on it. This is a very famous painting, and it's one of the more iconic works in our collection, and it's called The Disquieting Duckling. Of course, playing on H.C. Andersen's The Ugly Duckling, the fairy tale. And it's a very disquieting duckling because it's very large. First of all, you can see the swans next to it. It's also abstract, so it's also the idea of the abstract art that's coming and interfering with the old ways.
Yeah.
But he didn't do it to sort of cancel that culture that brought this up, because this is actually something he had a lot of respect for. This is where he started. This is where the interest in art started for him. That was seeing artworks like this at his friends' homes during the studies as a teacher. So he felt very devoted to this sort of historical, traditional amateur painting, and saw it as a very important part of the development of art, although it's been called kitsch and other things. So he said, why throw it away if you can modernize it with a few brushstrokes? So that's what he did. And then he wrote his name next to the other artist. He didn't cancel the original artist, who was completely unknown, of course. He wrote his own name there. And at this point, the critics simply didn't know what to do with it. It was
completely out of the box.
Completely out of the box, yeah. Because all of a sudden you have two artists, one completely unknown, and an original painting that doesn't represent a value at all, and then you have Jorn, who's actually becoming a recognized artist at this point, and then you have his painting interfering with the original one.
So did it ever happen that he talked or he met the previous artist? Like,
not in this case.
Okay,
no.
That would be fun.
That would have been fun, but many of them died.
Yeah, if
several
it's
years
old paintings, yeah.
before the paintings were ended up on
Yeah.
the flea markets. But there's a lot of stories. There's a lot of bits about these modifications. He did quite a few of them, and today they're also very famous. And there are many scholars of Jorn treasure the modifications of all his body of work. Then they treasure them the most.
Yeah. And it's like this one is from 62. I can totally see this happening like right now.
Yeah.
Like I think more, I associate it more with something that would happen right now.
Yeah. It's very contemporary.
62, yeah.
And timeless. And with the original frames as well. This one is also amazing. With the two children. And one of them, it's just added a beard on it. It's so playful. That's also what I did in school when I was having, we always got this new calendar every year. And there were always some, like commercial stuff, some images on the front page of happy people. And we always made beard, or like a pirate face or something with a scar. And that's just what he's doing here. He's just really working with that spontaneity that he also developed during the Cobra. And then he gets these, this boy got these very weird skinny legs here, right? And he's standing with this bird, and he also splashed some paint that he got for his luxury paintings, which we'll see in a moment. He also splashed it on here, which is actually lacquer for bicycles.
Yeah. I really like this one also.
Yeah, this one is amazing. Actually, it's supposed to be unfinished, but it's one of the most. It's maybe one of the most aesthetic ones.
Yeah.
The cleanest ones.
Yes. Yes.
It was on the cover of a catalog they did in Korea a few years back in 2019, where we did an exhibition in Seoul.
Ah, so cool.
And this one was used on the cover, so it's making it to the front pages. And this is a parallel project with the modifications. These are the luxury paintings.
The luxury paintings.
And the idea is that in America at this point, actually after the Second World War, the Americans were heroes all over Europe, right? So after the Second World War, new traditions of paintings also evolved in America. We have the action painting, which Jackson Pollock worked with. We have the abstract expressionism, which he kind of was part of together with Mark Rothko and Robert Motherwell, etc. And the luxury paintings Jorn started developing as a reaction towards this fetishism of American art, and of Jackson Pollock in particular, because he was splashing paint on an artwork on a canvas, and then it would sell for millions of dollars at that point. And Jorn thought that was a little hilarious, this idea of just, it was fine, but it was also hilarious, and that was just what he wanted to point at. So he would throw, Pollock would just throw paint on a canvas and then put it up, and then it would be sold. And then Jorn started to do the same thing as a caricature, not because this was his main project, but it was an experiment, and it was a caricature of what happened in the world, like the modification stuff. So Jorn would take cheap paint, usually this bicycle lacquer, which is this shiny paint used to paint bicycles, and then he would throw it on a canvas, and he would use strings that he would dip into like a bucket of paint, and he would put it on the canvas, and it would make these rather random shapes. He would also splash it on with a paintbrush, and then he would kind of like just let it go like this over the canvas and make these shapes. And then he called it luxury paint. Then it got these rather. This is one of the more expensive frames. Otherwise, he would get these rather cheap frames, but with plated gold on it, so that it would look very expensive. So that was the idea of it. So with Jorn, it's always not just black and white. There is always some underlying theme. There's always an idea that goes beyond what you just see.
That's really funny.
Yeah. So
you can see that he was funny guy.
Yeah, he was very funny, and although many things seem a little random with him, and then it's actually, he's usually thinking about it, but sometimes he's also developing the theories as he go along, and you can see that because he was also writing a lot. So He's also a writer and a theoretician. He's also making theories. Theoretician.
Okay.
I can't pronounce it right now, but he's also making theories about art and about visual culture in general, and also about ecology and history. So you can see when you're reading his text that he's usually developing his points as he go along. So
Okay.
where the article finishes might not be what it's leading up to in the beginning. And that's interesting because he's not cancelling it. He's not letting things out. He's not editing it afterwards. These are some of his sculptures, by the way, bronze sculptures. He produced them in clay shortly before he died. These are from 72. He died in 73, but also wanted to experiment with, with these three-dimensional objects. Some he did in clay, and some are also glazed. These are casts from the clay in bronze. And what you'll see, they work like the painting. So when you see, for example, in the painting, you see one figure, but then your gaze will start traveling around on the canvas because new figures will appear. And it's the same with the sculptures. So you move around it, and all the time new figures will appear. So it's a bit like the paintings. They're very ambiguous, and you can constantly see new faces, new figures, which makes them very difficult to photograph, by the way, because you actually have
What's
to
the right angle? There's no right angle.
There's no right angle. And of course, they all have their preferred angles, right? They all have a face somehow. But then if you move around it, completely new shades will appear. And it also depends very much on the light on them, because we can change the light and then you'll see a new face in them. So again, a three-dimensional painting in a way.
We hope you enjoyed this guided tour around Museum Jorn as much as we did. Thank you so much for staying with us, and see you next time.